My parents called me dead weight and said I needed to start paying rent to stay in my childhood bedroom. They expected me to argue or beg. Instead, I packed everything I owned into 2 suitcases and left in the middle of the night. A week later, they called in a panic asking why my room was empty. They thought rent would teach me respect. It taught me something better. It taught me I never needed their approval to build a successful life. The dinner table had always been a stage for my family's quiet cruelties. Not the overt, dramatic kind that makes for good television. No thrown wine glasses or screaming matches. Just the steady, daily erosion of a person's sense of worth, delivered over meatloaf and mashed potatoes like salt and pepper. I was 24 years old, a freelance graphic designer, and I lived in my childhood bedroom. The wallpaper was still the pale blue I had chosen at 12, faded now at the edges, peeling slightly near the window where condensation gathered in winter. My bed was still a twin, because my parents had never seen fit to upgrade it. My desk was the same cheap pressboard model I had used for homework, now cluttered with client files and reference books and a monitor that was 2 generations behind industry standard. I paid for that monitor myself. I paid for the software licenses, the domain renewals, the professional association memberships. I paid for my own health insurance and my own phone bill and my own car insurance, which was exorbitant because the car was 13 years old and constantly on the verge of catastrophic failure. I paid for these things because my parents had made it clear when I graduated college 3 years ago that their financial support ended with my diploma. I didn't resent this. I understood that they had limited resources, that my father's pension was modest, that my mother's part-time job at the library barely covered their own expenses. I was grateful they allowed me to stay in my childhood bedroom rent-free while I established my career. I tried to contribute in other ways. I bought groceries, handled household repairs, managed their technology. I was quiet and undemanding and endlessly accommodating because I believed that if I was grateful enough, helpful enough, invisible enough, I would eventually earn their approval. I was wrong. The campaign of mockery began subtly, as these things always do. A comment about my little art projects from my mother, delivered with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. A question from my father about when I was going to get a real job, framed as concern for my future. I smiled and nodded and explained, again, that graphic design was a legitimate profession, that my client list was growing, that I was making progress toward financial independence. They didn't hear me. They didn't want to hear me. They had already decided who I was, the underachiever, the dreamer, the child who had failed to launch, and no evidence to the contrary would dislodge that conviction. By the 3rd week, the mockery had intensified. My mother started calling my workspace the hobby room. My father began introducing me to his friends as our aspiring artist, with the particular emphasis that transformed aspiring into a synonym for unemployed. They laughed at my deadlines, dismissed my achievements, treated my profession as a charming delusion I would eventually outgrow. And through it all, they called me deadweight. It was my father who coined the phrase, one evening when I had retreated to my room after a particularly brutal client revision. I heard him through the thin walls, his voice carrying the weary frustration of a man who had worked 40 years in a job he hated and couldn't understand why anyone would choose a different path. She's 24 years old, living in her childhood bedroom, playing on her computer all day. We've carried her long enough. She's dead weight, and she's not showing any sign of lightening the load. My mother's response was quieter, but I caught the essential agreement. Maybe we need to be firmer. She needs to understand that this isn't sustainable. Deadweight. The phrase lodged in my chest like a splinter, festering over the following days. I heard it at breakfast, when my father asked if I had any real work scheduled. I heard it at dinner, when my mother sighed over my contributions to the grocery budget. I heard it in the silences between us, heavy with unspoken disappointment. I started working longer hours, taking on projects that paid less than my usual rate, accepting assignments that were beneath my skill level. I was desperate to prove them wrong, to generate enough income to move out, to finally escape the gravitational pull of their contempt. But the more I worked, the more exhausted I became, and the more exhausted I became, the harder it was to produce the quality work that would attract better clients. It was a downward spiral, and my parents were at the top, watching me descend. The dinner that changed everything was a Tuesday. I remember the date because it was my grandmother's birthday, Not that we were celebrating. My grandmother had died 5 years ago, and my parents rarely acknowledged her passing beyond the obligatory cemetery visit each spring. But I remembered her birthday, March 14th, and I had spent the afternoon thinking about her. The only member of my family who had ever looked at my sketches with genuine wonder, who had framed my childish drawings and hung them in her kitchen, who had told me, with absolute certainty, that I was going to be an artist. I was thinking about her as I set the table, as my mother brought the meatloaf from the oven, as my father settled into his chair with the sigh of a man who has spent his day doing things he would rather not do. I was thinking about her hands, gnarled with arthritis but still capable of holding a pencil, teaching me to draw perspective by sketching the oak tree in her backyard. "Dinner," my mother announced, and I took my seat. For a few minutes, we ate in silence. The television murmured in the living room, some news program my father had paused, but not muted. The clock on the wall ticked its steady, indifferent rhythm. I cut my meatloaf into precise squares and chewed without tasting. Then my father cleared his throat, and I knew, with the particular dread of a child who has learned to read parental preludes, that something was coming. "We need to discuss your living situation," he said, not looking at me. His gaze was fixed on the centerpiece, a ceramic bowl of artificial fruit that had occupied that spot since I was 10 years old. I set down my fork. "Okay, your mother and I have been talking." He paused, as if expecting me to interrupt. When I didn't, he continued. "We've been very generous, letting you stay here rent-free for the past 3 years. Most parents would have charged rent from day one, but we wanted to give you a chance to get established." I waited. The clock ticked. My mother's hands were folded in her lap, her expression carefully neutral. "But it's been 3 years, and you're not established. You're still working the same odd jobs, earning the same inconsistent income, living in the same room you occupied in high school." His voice hardened slightly. "We can't carry you forever. You're an adult, and it's time you started acting like one." I found my voice. "I'm trying. I've been building my client base, improving my skills. I'm making progress." "Progress," my father repeated, and the word was a dismissal. "You've been making progress for 3 years. How much longer do you expect us to subsidize your hobby?" "It's not a hobby. It's my career. It's a career that doesn't pay your bills." His voice was flat, final. "Starting next month, you'll pay rent if you want to stay here. $500 a month, due on the 1st. That's below market rate, and we're being more than reasonable. $500. I calculated quickly, my average monthly income, my existing expenses, the amount I had managed to save despite everything. $500 was doable, barely, but it would mean no margin for error, no buffer for emergencies, no possibility of ever saving enough to move out. My mother spoke for the first time, her voice carrying the particular blend of concern and condescension that I had come to recognize as her signature. "Maybe it'll teach you some respect. For us, for the value of money, for the sacrifices we've made. You've had it easy here, and you don't even seem to appreciate it." Respect. They wanted respect. They had spent 3 years mocking my profession, dismissing my achievements, calling me dead weight behind closed doors, and now they wanted me to pay them for the privilege of continuing to endure their contempt. Something inside me shifted. Not anger. Anger would come later, sharp and cleansing. Not grief. That would wait until I was alone, driving through the night with nowhere to go. Just clarity, cold and absolute. The recognition that I had been trying to earn something that was never available for purchase. "Okay," I said. My father blinked, thrown by my lack of resistance. "Okay, that's it. That's it." I picked up my fork and resumed eating. $500 a month, starting next month. "I understand." My parents exchanged glances, uncertain. I think they had expected me to argue, to negotiate, to break down in tears and beg for more time. My compliance disrupted their script, left them without a villain to vanquish or a victim to rescue. I finished my dinner, cleared my plate, and retreated to my room. The pale blue walls enclosed me, familiar and suffocating. I sat on my twin bed and stared at the ceiling, at the constellation of glow-in-the-dark stars I had stuck there when I was 8 years old and still believed wishes could come true. $500 a month. They wanted me to pay for the right to sleep in this room, to store my belongings in this closet, to exist in this space that had never truly been mine. They wanted me to compensate them for the inconvenience of my presence, to transform our relationship from parent-child into landlord-tenant, to formalize the transaction that had always underlain our interactions. And I had agreed. Not because I thought it was fair, not because I believed I owed them anything, but because their demand had finally, irrevocably, freed me. I had been trying to earn their love for 24 years. I had been a quiet child, a diligent student, a responsible adult. I had suppressed my ambitions, minimized my achievements, made myself small and undemanding and endlessly accommodating. I had done everything they asked and accepted everything they gave and never complained about the imbalance between my contributions and their acknowledgement. And it had never been enough. It would never be enough. Because the problem was not my career choice or my income or my living situation. The problem was me, my existence, my needs, my refusal to become the person they had decided I should be. Deadweight. The phrase echoed in my skull, but it no longer wounded me. It was simply a description, and like all descriptions, it revealed more about the describer than the described. I was not deadweight. I was a person of value, with skills and talents and aspirations that had nothing to do with my parents' limited imagination. I was a graphic designer who had built a client base from nothing, who had taught herself advanced software through YouTube tutorials and sheer persistence, who had created work that moved people and solved problems and generated genuine income. I was not deadweight, but I was done trying to prove it to people who had already made up their minds. I stood up, walked to my closet, and pulled out my suitcases. The packing took 3 hours. I worked methodically, sorting my belongings into categories: essentials, sentimental, sellable, disposable. My clothing fit into one medium suitcase, my professional equipment into another. Books and personal effects I packed into boxes I had saved from my last Amazon delivery. Furniture, what little I had, would have to remain: the twin bed, the pressboard desk, the rickety bookshelf that had belonged to my grandmother. I left my room exactly as I had found it, the glow-in-the-dark stars still affixed to the ceiling, the pale blue walls still peeling at the edges. I took nothing that wasn't mine, left nothing that wasn't trash. I wanted no reminders of this place, no artifacts of my former life to clutter my future. At 1:47 a.m., I carried my suitcases and boxes to my car, a 13-year-old Honda Civic with 187,000 miles and a persistent check engine light. The trunk swallowed my belongings with room to spare, my entire independent existence, condensed into 4 cubic feet of cargo space. I returned to the house one last time. I stood in the doorway of my room, now empty and anonymous, indistinguishable from the guest room my parents had always intended it to become. I thought about the girl who had slept in this room for 24 years, who had papered the walls with sketches and dreams, who had believed that if she was good enough, quiet enough, grateful enough, she would eventually be loved. She was still here, in a sense, embedded in the peeling paint and the faded wallpaper and the constellation of plastic stars. But I was leaving her behind. I left a note on the kitchen table, weighted by the ceramic bowl of artificial fruit. Mom and Dad, I've decided not to take you up on your rental offer. It's clear that my presence in your home has been a burden, and I don't want to continue imposing on your generosity. I've moved out and will be staying elsewhere while I pursue my career. I'll arrange to collect my remaining belongings within the next 30 days. You can keep or dispose of anything I've left behind. I have no further use for it. Thank you for the 24 years of housing and support. I wish you both the best. Emily. I signed my name, hesitated, then added nothing else. There was nothing else to say. The door closed behind me with a soft click, and I walked into the March night, the air cold and clean against my face. My car started on the 3rd try, the engine coughing to life with reluctant obedience. I pulled out of the driveway, past the house I had called home for 2 decades, and drove toward the uncertain geography of my future. I had no plan, no backup, no safety net, no emergency fund sufficient to cover first month's rent and security deposit in a city where studio apartments started at $1,400. I had a part-time client load, a rapidly declining bank account, and a car that was 1 repair away from the scrapyard. I also had, for the first time in my adult life, the absolute certainty that I had made the right choice. I drove to the only place I could think of, my friend Jenna's apartment, a cramped 1-bedroom in a neighborhood that was technically gentrifying but practically still dangerous. Jenna and I had met in college, bonded over late-night study sessions, and shared contempt for our intro to marketing professor. She was a UX designer now, working for a tech startup that provided unlimited kombucha and inadequate health insurance. It was 2:30 a.m. when I called her. She answered on the second ring, her voice groggy but alert. "Emily? What's wrong?" I left. The words tumbled out, unedited, unapologetic. I finally left. "Can I crash on your couch for a few days?" Silence. Then, "Oh my God. Of course. Are you okay? Do you need me to come get you?" "I'm in my car. I'm okay. I need somewhere to go. Come over. I'll make up the couch. We'll figure this out." I drove through the empty streets, past shuttered storefronts and sleeping neighborhoods, and arrived at Jenna's building as the first hints of dawn were staining the eastern sky. She met me at the door in pajama pants and a threadbare sweater, her expression shifting from concern to outrage as I unloaded my suitcases from the trunk. "Your parents actually charged you rent? After everything they said about your career?" "Starting next month. $500. I hauled a suitcase up the narrow staircase. I decided to decline the offer. That's not declining an offer. That's escaping a hostage situation. She unlocked her apartment and gestured me inside. The couch pulls out into a bed. It's not comfortable, but it's better than your car. It's perfect. Thank you. Don't thank me. Thank yourself for finally getting out of there. She hugged me, fierce and quick. We're going to get you through this. You're not dead weight. You're one of the most talented designers I know, and your parents are idiots. I laughed, the sound surprising me. Idiots is a strong word. Idiots is the only word. She released me and began rummaging through her linen closet. Now let's get you set up. Tomorrow. Well, today, we start figuring out your next move. The next week was a blur of activity and uncertainty. I slept on Jenna's pull-out couch, which was indeed uncomfortable, its springs poking through the thin mattress at strategic intervals. I worked from her kitchen table, my laptop propped on a stack of cookbooks to achieve ergonomic height. I applied for full-time positions, responded to freelance inquiries, calculated and recalculated my rapidly dwindling finances. And I waited for my parents to call. They didn't call the first day, or the second. I told myself they were giving me space, respecting my decision, processing their emotions. I told myself that my note had been clear, my departure unambiguous, my intentions unmistakable. On the third day, I stopped waiting. I had more urgent concerns, like the fact that my checking account balance had dropped below 4 figures, and I still hadn't secured a permanent housing solution. Jenna was generous, but her apartment was barely large enough for one person, and her patience, though seemingly infinite, was not a resource I was willing to exhaust. I needed to find my own place, which required a steady income, which required better clients, which required more time and energy than I had to spare. It was a classic catch, 22, and I was caught in its jaws. On the fourth day, I received an email that changed everything. "Dear Ms. Chun, I hope this message finds you well. My name is Marcus Webb, and I'm the creative director at Apex Digital Solutions. I recently came across your portfolio through the AIGA Design Directory and was extremely impressed by your work, particularly the branding package you created for Wildflower Bakery and the UI concepts for the Community Health Network project. We're currently seeking a junior graphic designer to join our in-house creative team. Based on your portfolio and experience, I believe you could be an excellent fit for this role. The position is full-time, with competitive salary and benefits, and we're hoping to fill it within the next 2 weeks. Would you be available for an interview this Friday at 2 p.m.? We can conduct it via Zoom or in person at our downtown office, whichever you prefer. I look forward to hearing from you. Best regards, Marcus Webb, Creative Director, Apex Digital Solutions." I read the email 3 times, then a fourth. Apex Digital Solutions was one of the premier creative agencies in the city, known for innovative campaigns and industry-leading compensation. Their junior designer position had been listed on every job board for weeks, with hundreds of applicants competing for a single opening. And they wanted to interview me. I responded within minutes, accepting the interview time and requesting the Zoom option. My interview suit was somewhere in my suitcases, and I wasn't sure it was wrinkle-free enough for an in-person appearance. Then I called Jenna, who screamed so loudly I had to hold the phone away from my ear. "This is it," she shouted. "This is your moment. You're going to nail the interview, get the job, and never have to worry about your parents' approval ever again." "I haven't gotten the job yet." "You will. You're amazing, and they're going to see that." Her voice softened. "And even if you don't, This email proves something important. You have value. Your work is recognized by people who actually understand the industry. Your parents' opinion is not the only opinion that matters. I knew she was right. I had always known, intellectually, that my parents' dismissal of my career was a reflection of their limitations, not mine. But knowing something intellectually is different from believing it emotionally, and for 4 days, I had been oscillating between desperate hope and profound despair. This email was the lifeline I needed. Not the job itself. That was still uncertain, but the validation that I was not the delusional failure my parents believed me to be. I was a professional with skills that were recognized and valued by people who had no obligation to pretend. Friday arrived, and I dressed in my best available clothing. A blazer I had steamed in Jenna's shower, a blouse I had hand-washed and air-dried, trousers I had pressed with a flat iron normally reserved for hair. I looked professional, competent, nothing like the dead weight my parents had described. The interview lasted 45 minutes. Marcus Webb was warm and enthusiastic, asking detailed questions about my design process and offering thoughtful feedback on my portfolio. He didn't dismiss my freelance experience as hobby work or question my commitment to the profession. He treated me as a peer, a colleague, a creative professional with valuable insights to contribute. When the interview concluded, he said, "You're exactly what we're looking for, Emily. I have 2 more candidates to interview next week, but I want you to know that you've set a very high bar." I thanked him, ended the call, and sat in stunned silence. Jenna, who had been hovering anxiously in the doorway, rushed over as soon as she saw my expression. "Well, how did it go?" I think it went really well." "Really well? What does that mean?" "It means he said I set a very high bar." I looked up at her, my eyes filling with tears. "He said I was exactly what they're looking for." Jenna grabbed my hands and pulled me to my feet. "This calls for celebration. Drinks are on me. I can't afford drinks, which is why they're on me." She was already reaching for her purse. "Come on. We're going to that dive bar on the corner, and we're going to toast your imminent career success." We went to the dive bar. We drank cheap beer and ate greasy appetizers and talked about our hopes and fears and the uncertain future stretching before us. For a few hours, I forgot about my parents and my empty room and the precariousness of my current situation. I was simply a young woman with a promising career ahead of her, celebrating with her best friend. And then, at 9:47 p.m., my phone rang. The caller ID displayed my parents' home number. I stared at the screen, my heart suddenly pounding, the ambient noise of the bar fading to a distant hum. "Aren't you going to answer?" Jenna asked. I should answer. I had known this call was coming, had been dreading it for 4 days. But now that it was here, I wasn't sure I was ready. I answered. "Hello, Emily." My mother's voice was strained, unfamiliar. "It's Mom. We've been trying to reach you all week. Why haven't you called?" "I've been busy." I kept my voice neutral. "Is something wrong?" "We came home tonight, and your room was empty." A pause. "Why is your room empty? Where are you?" The question hung in the air, absurd and inevitable. They had spent 3 years treating my presence as a burden and my career as a joke. They had demanded rent and respect and gratitude, framing their ultimatum as a lesson in adult responsibility. And now, for days after I had called their bluff, they were genuinely surprised that I had taken them seriously. "I moved out," I said. "I left a note on the kitchen table." "We saw the note. But we thought." She hesitated, and I heard my father's voice in the background, too muffled to distinguish words. "We thought you would come back. After you had time to think about it." "I've had 4 days to think about it. I'm not coming back." Silence. Then my mother's voice again, higher now, edged with something that might have been panic. "But where will you go? What will you do? You don't have any savings. You don't have a real job." "I have a job. I have a career. And I have an interview for a full-time position at a respected creative agency." I paused, letting that information settle. "I'm not the deadweight you think I am. I never was." "That's not. We never said you were deadweight. You said it. Both of you. Multiple times." My voice remained calm, but my grip on the phone was white-knuckled. "I heard you through the walls. You called me deadweight, and you said I wasn't showing any sign of lightening the load. Those were your exact words." The silence stretched, heavy with unacknowledged truth. I imagined my mother's face, her carefully maintained composure finally cracking. I imagined my father standing behind her, his expression shifting from confusion to dawning comprehension. We didn't mean it literally, my mother finally said. It was just an expression. It was an accurate expression of how you feel about me. And I've finally accepted that your feelings are not my responsibility. I took a breath. I'm not coming back. I'm building my own life, on my own terms. I hope you can respect that, even if you can't understand it. Emily, please. I have to go. I'll call you when I'm settled. I paused. Take care of yourselves. I ended the call before she could respond. My hands were shaking, my heart racing. But beneath the adrenaline was something else. Relief, profound and cleansing. I had said what needed to be said. I had defended myself without apology or aggression. I had claimed my independence and refused to be shamed for it. Jenna was watching me, her expression a mixture of concern and fierce pride. How do you feel? Like I just ran a marathon. I set down my phone and picked up my beer. Also like I need another drink. She signaled the bartender. Make it 2. The job offer came on Tuesday. I was at Jenna's kitchen table, revising a freelance logo concept, when my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. I answered, and Marcus Webb's warm voice filled my ear. Emily, I'm delighted to inform you that we'd like to extend an offer for the junior designer position. Your portfolio was exceptional. Your interview responses were thoughtful and articulate, and our entire team was impressed by your creative vision and technical skills. I don't remember what I said in response. I remember thanking him, accepting the position, and then sitting in stunned silence as he outlined the compensation package. Salary that was more than double my highest freelance year, full health benefits, a 401k match, and a professional development stipend. I remember him saying I could start in 2 weeks, that HR would send the formal offer letter, that he was excited to have me on the team. I remember hanging up and calling Jenna, who screamed so loudly I had to hold the phone away from my ear again. I remember crying, finally, the tears I had been suppressing for 4 days and 4 years and 24 years releasing in a cathartic flood. I was not dead weight. I was not a failure. I was not the delusional artist my parents had dismissed and derided. I was a professional with a career and a salary and a future that I had built entirely on my own merits. The offer letter arrived an hour later. I printed it, signed it, scanned it, and returned it. Then I sat back in my chair and looked at the cramped, cluttered kitchen that had been my refuge for the past week, and I allowed myself to imagine what came next. An apartment of my own. Not a room in my parents' house, not a couch in my friend's living room, but a space that was entirely, completely mine, with a real bed and a real desk and walls I could paint any color I chose. Furniture. Not hand-me-downs from relatives or cast-offs from family friends, but pieces I selected myself, reflecting my taste and serving my needs. A sofa that wasn't lumpy, a mattress that wasn't 20 years old, a bookshelf that didn't wobble. Peace. The quiet, sustaining peace of knowing that I was exactly where I was supposed to be, doing exactly what I was supposed to do, without apology or justification or the constant, exhausting effort of trying to earn approval that was never available. I started apartment hunting that afternoon. The next 3 weeks were a whirlwind of activity and transformation. I found a studio apartment in a neighborhood that was accessible, affordable, and within walking distance of a coffee shop that would become my second office. I signed the lease, paid the security deposit, and spent my first weekend assembling IKEA furniture with Jenna's patient assistance and occasional profanity. My new home was modest. 400 square feet of hardwood floors and original molding, a kitchen the size of a closet, a bathroom that required strategic positioning to use the toilet and shower simultaneously. But it was mine. The walls were bare, awaiting my choice of paint. The windows faced east, flooding the space with morning light. The bedroom alcove was just large enough for a full-size bed and the nightstand I had found at a thrift store. I moved my belongings from Jenna's apartment in 3 carloads, my Honda Civic straining under the weight of 2 suitcases for boxes and a growing collection of houseplants. I unpacked slowly, deliberately, placing each item with intentionality. My grandmother's sketchbook on the nightstand. My framed degree on the wall above my desk. My collection of design awards on the floating shelf I installed myself, with a level and a power drill and a profound sense of accomplishment. On my first night in the apartment, I sat on my new sofa, a gently used sectional I had found on Facebook Marketplace, and surveyed my domain. The windows were dark, the city glittering beyond the glass. The refrigerator hummed in the kitchen, empty except for a 6-pack of sparkling water and a container of leftover takeout. My laptop sat on the coffee table, closed but not forgotten, awaiting tomorrow's projects and deadlines. I was alone. I was independent. I was, for the first time in my adult life, exactly where I wanted to be. My phone buzzed with a text from Jenna. "How's the new place?" I typed my response. "Perfect. Come over Saturday. I'll make dinner." "Deal. So proud of you." I set down my phone and leaned back into the unfamiliar comfort of my own sofa. The cushions still smelled faintly of their previous owner's fabric softener, but they would soon absorb my scent, my presence, my claim. This was my home now, my sanctuary, my evidence that I was capable of building a life from nothing. I slept that night with the windows open, the sound of distant traffic and the smell of the city filling my dreams. I woke at dawn, disoriented by the unfamiliar light, and then remembered. This was my bedroom, my window, my sky. I was home. My parents called again, a week after I moved in. I was at my desk, reviewing a design brief for my first solo project at Apex, when my phone vibrated with their familiar ringtone. I hesitated, then answered. "Hello, Emily." My mother's voice was subdued, stripped of its usual condescension. "How are you?" "I'm good. I started my new job 2 weeks ago." I paused. "I also have my own apartment now." "Your own apartment?" A pause. "Where?" "In the city. It's a studio, but it's nice. I'm happy here." "That's good." Another pause, longer. "Your father and I have been talking." "About what happened?" "About the things we said." I waited, not offering absolution or assistance. "We were wrong," she continued, her voice thick. "Not just about the rent, but about everything. Your career, your choices, your value. We didn't understand what you were doing, so we dismissed it. We thought if we pushed you hard enough, you would give up on this design thing and pursue something more stable." A shaky breath. "We didn't realize that we were pushing you away instead." I processed her words, weighing their sincerity. My mother had never been comfortable with vulnerability, had always wrapped her critiques in concern and her demands in generosity. This raw, unguarded admission was unprecedented. "I appreciate you saying that," I said carefully. "It doesn't erase the past 3 years or the 24 years before that. But I appreciate it. We want to make it right." My father's voice, unexpected, joining the conversation. He must have been on the extension in the living room. "We know we can't undo what we did, but we want to try to be better. If you'll let us." I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of their words. This was what I had wanted for so long. Acknowledgement, apology, the promise of change. But I had learned, in the weeks since I left, that wanting something and needing something were not the same thing. I had survived without their approval, thrived without their validation. I no longer required their love to believe in my own worth. "I'm not ready to come back," I said. "I'm not ready to pretend that everything is fine, that the years of mockery and dismissal didn't happen. I need time to build my life, to establish my career, to figure out who I am without your expectations shaping me." "We understand," my mother said. "Take whatever time you need." "But I'm not cutting you off," I continued. "I still want you in my life, if you're willing to be in it on my terms. That means no more comments about my career, no more jokes about my choices, no more framing your criticisms as concern. You treat me with respect, and I'll continue to have a relationship with you." "That's fair," my father said. "More than fair." We talked for a few more minutes, surface-level updates about work and weather and the minor dramas of daily existence. It was awkward, stilted, the conversation of strangers learning to communicate in a new language. But it was a start. When I hung up, I sat in the silence of my apartment and allowed myself to feel the complexity of my emotions. Relief, certainly, that the estrangement was no longer absolute. Grief, for the years of conflict and misunderstanding that could never be recovered. Hope, tentative and fragile, that my family might eventually become something other than a source of pain. And beneath it all, a quiet, steady certainty. I was going to be okay. Not because my parents had finally acknowledged their failures, not because I had a job and an apartment and a future that was finally taking shape, but because I had proven to myself that I was capable of surviving without any of those things. I was not dead weight. I had never been dead weight. I was a person of value and potential, and I had finally given myself permission to believe it. 6 months later, I was promoted to mid-level designer. It was an accelerated timeline, the result of consistently exceeding expectations and taking on responsibilities far beyond my job description. Marcus had become not just my boss, but my mentor, investing time and resources in my professional development, pushing me to tackle projects I didn't think I was ready for, and then celebrating when I proved him right. "I knew you had potential the moment I saw your portfolio," he told me when he delivered the promotion news. "But you've exceeded even my expectations. You're not just a talented designer, you're a creative leader. This company is lucky to have you." I thanked him, accepted the congratulations of my colleagues, and retreated to my desk to process the magnitude of what I had achieved. 24 years of being dismissed as a dreamer, 6 months of proving that my dreams were viable. The contrast was almost absurd. That evening, I called my parents with the news. My mother was cautiously supportive, asking questions about my new responsibilities and expressing muted pride. My father was quieter, but I heard the shift in his voice, the recognition, finally, that his daughter had built something real. "We're proud of you," my mother said, and the words, so long withheld, landed with unexpected weight. "We should have said it sooner. We should have said it a lot sooner." "Thank you," I said. "That means more than you know." We talked for a while longer, the conversation easier than it had been in months. My mother told me about her library's summer reading program. My father complained about the neighbor's overgrown hedge. It was mundane, ordinary, the small talk of families who had learned to avoid contentious topics. But it was also genuine, the first tentative steps toward a relationship that was not defined by conflict and resentment. I didn't forgive them. Not yet, not fully. The wounds of 24 years were not healed by 6 months of effort, and I wasn't sure they ever would be. But I was willing to try if they were. And for now, that was enough. A year after I left my parents' house, I was promoted again, this time to senior designer. My portfolio had expanded to include national campaigns and international clients. My work had been featured in industry publications and recognized with awards I had once only dreamed of. I had built a reputation, a career, a life that was entirely my own. I had also built something else, a family. Not the biological family that had dismissed and diminished me, but the family of choice that had supported and sustained me. Jenna, my steadfast friend and occasional therapist. Marcus, my mentor and advocate. My colleagues at Apex, who treated me as a peer rather than a burden. The community of designers and artists I had connected with through professional organizations and social media. These were the people who saw me clearly and chose me freely, without condition or transaction. These were the people who celebrated my successes and supported my struggles, who called me talented and capable and worthy, not because they had to, but because they believed it. And slowly, gradually, I began to believe it too. 2 years after I left, my parents came to visit my apartment. It was a Saturday in October, the city crisp and golden with autumn light. I had spent the morning cleaning and arranging, preparing my space for their inspection with a mixture of anxiety and defiance. This was my home, my sanctuary, my evidence of independent survival. I didn't need their approval, but I wanted them to see what I had built. They arrived at 1 p.m., my father clutching a bottle of wine and my mother bearing a potted orchid. They stood in my doorway, taking in the 400 square feet of carefully curated space, and I watched their expressions shift from uncertainty to something that might have been admiration. "This is lovely," my mother said, setting the orchid on my kitchen counter. "You've made it so you." I accepted the compliment, uncertain how to respond. "Thank you." I painted the accent wall myself. "It's a beautiful color." She touched the wall, a deep teal I had selected after weeks of sampling. Very calming. My father was examining my bookshelf, his fingers hovering over my grandmother's sketchbook. "Is this Grandma Helen's?" "Yes. She left it to me in her will." I had told him this before, at the reading of the will, but he had never acknowledged it. "I keep it here, for inspiration. She would be proud of you." His voice was rough. "She always said you were the artist in the family." I didn't understand what she meant until now. I didn't know what to say to that. 26 years of dismissal, and now this tentative, belated recognition. It was not absolution. It was not reconciliation. But it was something. I gave them the tour, such as it was, my studio apartment requiring approximately 90 seconds to fully experience. And then we sat at my small dining table, drinking the wine my father had brought and eating the lunch I had prepared. The conversation was careful, deliberate, each of us navigating the new terrain of our relationship with cautious steps. "How's work?" my mother asked. "Good. I'm leading a rebranding project for a major client. It's challenging, but I'm learning a lot." "That's wonderful." She hesitated. "Do you ever think about freelancing again? Going out on your own?" "Eventually, maybe. Right now, I'm happy where I am. I have good colleagues, interesting projects, and the stability of a regular paycheck." I paused. It's nice to not have to worry about money. My father winced almost imperceptibly. I hadn't intended the comment as a jab, but I didn't regret it either. The financial precarity of my freelance years had been a direct result of their refusal to support my career choice, and it was simply true that I was better off now. "We should have helped you more," he said quietly, "when you were starting out. We should have believed in you." I set down my wine glass. "You didn't believe in me because you didn't understand what I was doing. I've accepted that. But I need you to understand that your lack of belief had consequences. It made me doubt myself, question my abilities, delay my dreams by years. I don't hold that against you anymore, but I won't pretend it didn't happen." They nodded, accepting my terms. We finished our meal in contemplative silence, the afternoon light shifting through my east-facing windows, the city humming its eternal hymn beyond the glass. When they left, my mother hugged me, a genuine embrace, not the perfunctory gestures of our previous interactions. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. "I should have said it sooner." "Thank you," I said, "for saying it now." My father shook my hand, formal and awkward, but his grip was firm and his eyes were wet. "Take care of yourself." "I will. You too." The door closed behind them, and I stood alone in my apartment, surrounded by the evidence of my independent life. The teal accent wall, the grandmother's sketchbook, the awards and certifications, and the accumulated artifacts of 26 years of struggle and triumph. I didn't cry. I didn't laugh. I simply breathed, and the air was clean and cold and tasted like freedom. 3 years after I left my parents' house, I was made creative director at Apex. It was the culmination of everything I had worked for, the sleepless nights and the relentless self-doubt, the freelance projects that paid pennies and the full-time position that finally recognized my worth. The years of proving myself to colleagues and clients, and, most importantly, to myself. The announcement was made at a company-wide meeting, my colleagues applauding as Marcus handed me the ceremonial creative director mug, a tradition I had always found slightly absurd, but which now felt like a coronation. I made a short speech, thanking my team and my mentors and the organization that had believed in me when I was just a junior designer with a portfolio and a prayer. Afterward, Marcus pulled me aside. "You've exceeded every expectation I had when I hired you. And I had very high expectations. Thank you. I couldn't have done it without your support. You could have. You just did it faster with my support." He smiled. "I'm not being modest. Talent like yours would have found its way regardless. I just helped clear the path." I thought about his words often in the following weeks. Talent like yours would have found its way regardless. It was true, I realized, or at least it could be true. The path I had taken was not the only possible path. It was simply the path that had presented itself. If Apex hadn't hired me, I would have found another agency, or continued freelancing, or launched my own studio. I would have struggled, certainly, and I might have taken longer to reach this level of success. But I would have reached it eventually. Because my worth was not contingent on external validation. It was not determined by my parents' approval or my employer's recognition, or any other measure of external success. My worth was inherent, indivisible, absolute. It had always been there, waiting for me to recognize it. And finally, after 29 years of searching, I had found it. I still talk to my parents regularly. The relationship is not what I once dreamed it would be, not the effortless intimacy of genuinely loving families, not the unconditional acceptance I had craved as a child. But it is real, and it is honest. And it is built on terms that I have chosen rather than terms that were imposed upon me. My mother calls every Sunday, and we discuss the mundane details of our separate lives. She tells me about her garden, her book club, her ongoing feud with the neighbor's cat. I tell her about my projects, my travels, the small victories and frustrations of creative work. We avoid the topics that have caused us pain, but we no longer pretend that those topics don't exist. They are simply not part of the conversation we have chosen to have. My father and I have developed our own rhythm, a quarterly lunch at a diner halfway between our respective homes. We talk about sports and weather and the practical logistics of adult existence. He has never explicitly apologized for the years of silence and complicity, but I see his effort in the regularity of our meetings, the questions he asks about my work, the way he has stopped introducing me as our aspiring artist. It is not forgiveness. It is not reconciliation. It is simply two people, connected by biology and history, learning to coexist without causing each other harm. And for now, that is enough. Jenna and I still get together every week, our friendship deepened by the years of shared struggle and mutual support. She was promoted to lead UX researcher at her startup, and we celebrate our respective successes with the same dive bar beers and greasy appetizers that sustained us through our leanest years. Marcus continues to mentor me, though our relationship has evolved from supervisor-subordinate to genuine friendship. He attended my 30th birthday party, held in my new apartment, a two-bedroom with actual walls between the living and sleeping areas, and gave me a signed first edition of a design monograph I had been coveting for years. I knew you were special the moment I saw your portfolio, he told me that night. But I didn't realize how much you would teach me. I laughed. What could I possibly teach you? How to recognize potential. How to nurture talent. How to be the kind of leader that people actually want to follow. He raised his glass. You're not just a great designer, Emily. You're a great mentor, a great colleague, and a great friend. That's rare. I accepted his toast, and his words joined the accumulating evidence of my worth. Not because I needed evidence anymore, but because it was still affirming to receive it. And I thought about my parents, sitting in their quiet house, perhaps wondering what their daughter had become. I thought about the dead weight they had dismissed and the thriving woman I had become. I thought about the years of struggle and the eventual triumph, the loneliness and the liberation, the long, winding road that had led me here. I thought about the dinner table, the meatloaf and mashed potatoes, the announcement that I would have to pay rent to remain in my childhood bedroom. I thought about the suitcases and the midnight departure and the desperate uncertainty of that first week on Jenna's couch. I thought about the job offer and the apartment and the slow, patient construction of a life that was entirely my own. And I thought about the phone call, my mother's panicked question, "Why is your room empty?" Because I was no longer empty. Because I had filled myself with my own achievements and aspirations and the love of people who chose me freely. Because I had learned that home was not a place you were given, but a place you built, and I had built mine with my own hands. My room was empty because I was no longer a child waiting to be loved. I was an adult, capable of loving myself. And that, finally, was enough. 5 years after I left my parents' house, I returned. It was not a triumphant homecoming. I did not arrive in a luxury car, wearing designer clothes and dripping with conspicuous success. I drove my Honda Civic, still running. Somehow, its check engine light now a permanent fixture, and wore jeans and a sweater and the comfortable confidence of a woman who no longer needed to prove anything. My parents met me at the door, older now, their hair grayer and their movements slower. My mother hugged me with genuine warmth. My father shook my hand with something approaching respect. We sat in the living room, the same furniture arranged in the same configuration, and we talked about the mundane realities of our separate lives. I told them about my work, my apartment, my friends. I told them about the design conference I had spoken at in Chicago, the award I had won for a public health campaign, the mentorship program I had started for young designers from underprivileged backgrounds. I did not boast. I simply reported, as one might report the weather or the news. They listened without interrupting, without dismissing, without framing their questions as critiques. My mother asked thoughtful follow-ups about my mentorship program. My father wanted to know how the design industry was evolving, what skills were most valuable, whether artificial intelligence would eventually replace human creativity. I answered each question with patient thoroughness, grateful for their genuine curiosity. After dinner, my mother had made meatloaf, acknowledging the irony with a wry smile. I asked if I could see my old room. They exchanged glances, then nodded. My father retrieved the key from the kitchen drawer, where it had presumably rested for 5 years, and handed it to me without comment. I walked down the familiar hallway, past the family photographs that still documented my brother's achievements and my relative invisibility. I paused at the door, key in hand, and allowed myself a moment of anticipation. The lock turned smoothly, and I stepped inside. The room was unchanged. The pale blue walls, the peeling paint, the twin bed with its faded comforter, the pressboard desk, now bare, where I had spent countless hours sketching and designing and dreaming, the bookshelf, empty except for a few forgotten paperbacks, the glow-in-the-dark stars, still affixed to the ceiling, their luminescence long since faded. It was a museum of my former life, preserved in amber, waiting for a return that would never come. I walked through the space, touching surfaces, remembering the girl who had inhabited this room for 24 years. She had been so desperate for approval, so convinced that her worth was contingent on external validation. She had tried so hard to earn love that was never available for purchase. I wished I could tell her that it would be okay, that she would survive the mockery and dismissal, the dead-weight accusations, and the rental ultimatums, that she would build a career and a life and a family of choice that would sustain her far more effectively than the biological family that had failed her, that she would learn, eventually, that her worth was inherent and indivisible and absolutely, irrevocably hers. But she didn't need me to tell her. She already knew, on some level, that she was capable of more than her parents believed. She had just needed time to prove it. I left the room, closing the door behind me. I returned the key to my father, who accepted it without comment. "It's a good room," I said. "It served its purpose." He nodded, his eyes suspiciously bright. "We should probably update it. Maybe turn it into a guest room." "That would be nice." We stood in the hallway, three people connected by biology and history and the complicated legacy of imperfect love. We had caused each other pain, failed each other in countless ways, disappointed each other's expectations. But we were still here, still trying, still reaching towards something that resembled genuine connection. It was not the relationship I had dreamed of as a child, not the unconditional acceptance I had craved for 24 years. But it was real, and it was honest, and it was built on terms that I had chosen rather than terms that were imposed upon me. And for now, that was enough. I am 32 years old. I am creative director at one of the most respected creative agencies in the country. I have a 2-bedroom apartment with actual walls between the living and sleeping areas, a retirement account that is growing steadily, and a collection of houseplants that I have somehow managed to keep alive for 3 consecutive years. I have a family of choice, friends who love me, colleagues who respect me, mentors who continue to guide me. I have a biological family that is learning, slowly and imperfectly, to treat me as an equal rather than a disappointment. I have a career that challenges and fulfills me, a profession that I love, a future that stretches before me with infinite possibility. And I have the memory of a Tuesday night in March, sitting at a dinner table while my parents announced that I would have to pay rent to remain in my childhood bedroom. I have the memory of packing my suitcases, loading my car, driving into the night with no destination and no plan and no certainty beyond the absolute conviction that I was doing the right thing. I have the memory of my mother's panicked phone call, her question echoing through the years. "Why is your room empty?" Because I filled it with my own life. Because I stopped waiting for permission to exist and started building existence on my own terms. Because I finally understood that the rent they were demanding was not about money. It was about control, compliance, the subordination of my dreams to their expectations. I refused to pay that rent. I refused to trade my autonomy for their approval. I refused to continue diminishing myself to make them comfortable. And in that refusal, I found myself. My room is empty now. Not the physical room in my parents' house, which will eventually become a guest room or a home office or a repository for accumulated possessions, but the metaphorical room, the space in my psyche that was reserved for their approval, their validation, their conditional love. That room is empty. I have cleared it out, swept it clean, repainted it in colors of my own choosing. I have filled it with my own achievements and aspirations, and the love of people who see me clearly and choose me freely. I have made it my own, and it is enough. If you've ever been called dead weight, dismissed, diminished, know that their assessment is not your truth. Your worth is not determined by people who are incapable of recognizing it. Your potential is not limited by their limited imagination. Your future is not foreclosed by their refusal to believe in you. You can leave. You can pack your suitcases and drive into the night with no destination and no plan and no certainty beyond the absolute conviction that you are doing the right thing. You can build a life from nothing, brick by brick, day by day, choice by choice. And one day, you will look around at the life you have built, the career, the home, the family of choice, the quiet satisfaction of knowing that you did it yourself. And you will realize that you never needed their permission to exist. You were never dead weight. You were always a ship, waiting for open water. I found my open water on a Tuesday night in March, and I have been sailing ever since. If this story resonated with you, please like, share, and subscribe for more tales of resilience, independence, and finding your worth.